Ciao friends, and welcome to a new Unplugged video from SQL BI. In this video, I'm going to answer to a question that appeared on one of our forums. A user asked quite an interesting question, even though I don't think it's a common scenario, but I think understanding the solution is indeed interesting. Here is the problem. He has a calculation group that contains a lot of calculation items. And the requirement is to limit the maximum number of calculation items that can be placed on a report. The reason might be performance, the reason might be whatever. I'm not interested right now in the reason why there is this requirement. But the thing is, we need to understand how many calculation items are being selected out of a calculation group and then change the behavior of the calculation group itself. So, for example, if we want to limit to a maximum of 5 calculation items, if the user selects 6 calculation items, we blank out everything or we throw an error or whatever kind of message we want. Now, solving the problem is very simple if you are doing the same on a regular table, because you just count the number of values of that column using all selected to get rid of the filter in the current visual, and in that way you can understand how many values are being selected through a slicer. With calculation groups, this is not that simple, because you cannot count the number of calculation items that are selected outside once the calculation item has been applied. So we will need to find a different path. Let's do that together. First, the scenario. Let's start not from here, instead let's start from the article. Now, this is the article using calculation group to selectively replace measure in DAX expression, and near the bottom we have the comments. Here we have, let me increase the font a bit. Doug asked a question that is, I'm trying to get the count of calculation items in calculation group that are in the filter context actually. And he already provides a sort of solution, this calculate count of calculation group with all selected. The thing is, he wants to count how many calculation items are being selected through some slicer. And the idea is to blank the calculation item if the user pulls too many on the rows or on the columns. Again, the reason may be performance or whatever. There is some sort of discussion, but then yesterday Sergio said, it's too long and complex to be explained in a comment, but Alberto and Marco are going to write an article or record a video. So here I am. Let's find the solution to the scenario. First we need to understand a bit of the problem. This count will not work with calculation groups, because calculation groups are applied, and once the calculation group has been applied, you can no longer check its values. But we need to work on a model. So first of all, we need to create a model that contains our 10 calculation items that will basically do nothing, and then we find a way to limit it. So let's get started. This is just a contoso, regular contoso with nothing fancy, and we want a calculation group with, let's say, 10 calculation items. So, time to open Tabular Editor. Where are you, Tabular Editor? Here it is. Okay, let me move it on another monitor. Here we are. Now, we need a calculation group. We call it, with a lot of creativity, calculation group. That contains a column that we call calculation group. And then we need to create 10 calculation items. So let's create the first one, calculation item 1. And it doesn't do anything, just selected measure. I'm not interested in the content of the calculation item. Whatever it computes, it's fine, as long as it's there. And then we need to create many of them. That's a perfect scenario to do copy and paste. So we have a calculation item 2, and then we repeat them a few times. Okay. That will be 3. Then we have 4, 5, 6, 7. I could have stopped earlier, but I said 9. I said 10, 9, and 10. So we have now 10 calculation items that do nothing at all. They all return selected measure, but they are there. Now we can go back, refresh, and then I have my calculation group. If I take the calculation item and put it here, why do I show only calculation item 1? Maybe I didn't save. Let me save it. My bad. I need to start again. I didn't save and I messed up everything. So let's start again. That will be 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm happy with 7 now. Now I save it. Go back to Power BI Desktop, and now I have calculation item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Next, I need to place it also in a slicer. So let me create a slicer with a bit larger font. Let's use 20. And I should have selected slicer earlier. Okay. Now from here I can select a set of calculation items. Let's say that I want to limit it to 3. So if I select 1, that is fine, 2 is fine, 1, 2, and 5 is still fine, but as soon as I select 7, I want to stop it. And here is the problem. I cannot just count the number of rows which are selected outside. Why that? Because if you look at here, when I'm here, the calculation item has already been applied. So if I replace, let's replace calculation item 1, for example, with a count rows of values all selected. So we see the result. For calculation item, instead of returning selected measure, we do calculate count rows of values of a calculation group all selected. Let's see the result. Okay, you see that it shows 1. It does not show, oh, you don't see that. You see that it shows calculation item 1, even though I have 1, 2, 3, 4 that are selected, because the calculation item has been applied and therefore the filter is already active. What I need to do is control or count, perform this count, but this count needs to happen before the calculation item has been applied. And you cannot do that in a measure because a measure is executed after the calculation group has been applied. So we need something that is stronger than a calculation group. And what can be stronger than a calculation group? Well, another calculation group. What I can do is create another calculation group that I use only to limit the number of items which is visible in the calculation group that I want to limit. And I also need to make sure that my new calculation group, the limiter, is being applied before the second calculation item, because I want to control the behavior of this calculation item. So let's do that. I need another calculation group. And this time we call it calculation group limiter. And this will have, well, let's choose a name, calculation group limiter. And it has two values. One calculation item that says no limits. And this does not do anything, just selected measure. But then we create another one that we call limit to 5, limit to 3, we said. And here what I can do, I can perform the calculate count rows, which, by the way, I already have written here. So I can just take this code, go here, and say if calculate count rows values of calculated is greater than 3, then blank. Otherwise, selected measure. Now, the good thing is that this code is going to be executed before the application of the second calculation item. So I have the option of controlling it. And this should do the trick. Let me save that. Go back, refresh. Now I need another slicer to select the limiter. I have the limiter here. Let's put it here, get rid. So if I choose no limits, I can choose 1, 2, 3, 4 calculation item and everything is working. If I select limit to 3, it shows a blank. If I only filter 3, now it shows 1, 2, 3. And it does not really matter whether I choose them in order or randomly, because I'm counting the number of items which are selected in the previous calculation item. And that is something that a calculation group can do, a regular measure cannot do, because a regular measure is executed after the application of the calculation item. So that is already good. I want to show you the important detail, that is the precedence. Look at the precedence. The limiter has a precedence of 1 and the calculation group has a precedence of 0. This means the limiter is applied first and this is applied later. If you do not place the precedence the correct way, let's say that we assign 10 to the calculation group. Now what is going to happen with 10 for the calculation group is that the calculation group with 10 different values, that will be applied first, and only later the limiter will happen to be applied. Therefore, my limiter will no longer work. Let's test it. I change the calculation group to 10 and the limiter to 1. Then I save it. Let me see if it saved everything. Yes, now I can go back here. And I can select 4, 5. You see that now, even though I have limiter to limit to 3, I can select as many as I want, and this is not working. If I want to make this work, I need to go here and set the precedence the right way. If calculation group is 10, calculation limiter should be any value that is larger than 10. Then I save it, go back. Limit to 3 is active, so I see a blank. And it is showing a value. Now, this technique is interesting because it gives you more opportunities. Think, for example, that you want to provide a default value to a calculation group. So you want to understand what the user selected out of the calculation items. And if the user didn't make any selection, then you want to apply a default selection. With two calculation groups, you can do that because the default calculation item will be able to check the selection that happened on the calculation item that you want to control, and then you work with that. So despite being a strange question, I have never been asked this question, it actually has several different usages. Mixing calculation groups proves to be kind of useful. So, as you have seen, the question by itself was kind of strange, but in the process of searching for the solution, we discovered that you can use a calculation group to control another calculation group. You cannot do that with a measure, you cannot do that from inside of the calculation group itself, but you need another calculation group on top of the one you want to control. And the first idea that came to my mind is a default value. That is interesting. Again, I really hope default values are at some time will be part of calculation groups, because they would be super useful. But now that we don't have them, you can think about creating a solution with two calculation groups to control another one. And generally speaking, whenever you have multiple calculation groups, you always need to pay attention to the precedence order. In this scenario, that was rather simple because we wanted one calculation group to control another calculation group. But when you have multiple calculation groups in a model, you need to pay a lot of attention to the precedence order. It is utterly simple to mess up all the calculation just because you didn't pay attention to the precedence order. We have a lot of articles on SQL BI that you can read to learn about precedence order and calculation groups, and most important, the difference between application and evaluation of calculation items. That's enough for the Unplugged. Hope you liked it and enjoy DAX.